Environmental Protection Agency is often controversial as they work to protect our air, land, and water. They recently proposed a new set of rules about the waters of the United States that has some folks stirred up. We'll talk to the EPA and get the straight story next on Show Me Ag. Welcome to Show Me Ag. I'm your host, Kyle Vickers. Thanks for joining us. The EPA recently proposed a new rule which has some folks pretty upset. The rule is designed to clarify what waters of the United States are to be regulated, and some farm groups are saying it's a big overreach of the EPA's authority and will cause Missouri farmers a new set of headaches complying with federal regulations as they go about the business of producing food and fiber. We're going to get to the bottom of this controversy with our guest, Flournoy, Director of the Water, Wetlands, and Pesticide Division for the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 7. Karen, thanks for being with us. Going back a long time ago when the EPA was first considered, I can remember when we had terrible water pollution, a river near Cleveland caught fire, that sort of thing. The EPA has got quite a history of protecting our waters.
Right. Well, first, Kyle, thanks for the opportunity to be here. And in the 70s, Congress passed the Clean Water Act, which was focused on improving water quality of surface waters, lakes, ponds, various waters like that. And through the years, with the efforts of businesses, individuals, agriculture, communities through construction of wastewater treatment plants, all of these various efforts have improved the water quality across the country significantly.
We have made a lot of progress, as I understand it, in our water quality.
Yes, that's correct.
And so what your role is here in Region 7, which is the Midwest?
Right. Our states are Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska. And we work with the state environmental agencies like the Missouri Department of Natural Resources to implement the Clean Water Act.
So this is, I assume, sometimes a challenge. What's the biggest challenge here in this four-state area that you guys face?
Well, the biggest challenge that we currently face are really, there's two I would want to talk about. First is nutrient pollution in our waters that often cause algae blooms to a point where maybe a recreational reservoir can't be used for boating and swimming. Another one that we're really seeing a lot of problem with is when we have extreme drought or extreme flood and the impacts on wastewater treatment plants, sewage collection systems, and also on the quality of those surface waters. So those are two big issues we're dealing with right now. So
we've got about 40 years of history here with the EPA
right.
and trying to regulate some of these things that go into our water. And now we've got this new rule, and a lot of people are agitated about it. It really starts with some history to the Clean Water Act, I believe.
Right.
Can you explain to us a little bit about the background?
Right. Well, there's always been a definition of waters of the U.S. in the Clean Water Act. And through the years, both EPA and the Corps of Engineers, who have responsibility for a portion of the Clean Water Act that is associated with what are called dredge and fill permits. So if someone is dredging a stream, for example, or filling a wetland for a development, those permits to do those activities come from the Corps of Engineers. So we have joint responsibility for that portion of the Clean Water Act. But the definition has been there since the beginning. Part of what has driven this proposed rule is two lawsuits that went all the way to the Supreme Court and the decisions that the Supreme Court rendered in 2001 and 2006. And so as a result of those decisions, the Corps and EPA are attempting to put out a rule that will make it very clear what waters are considered waters of the U.S. and what waters are not considered waters of the U.S.
And so as I understand it, the part of this, the Supreme Court history has to do with some kind of remote areas where are wetlands and intermittent streams, that sort of thing,
right.
would be regulated. And you folks are asking for some clarification by this rule as to how that's going to be applied.
That's correct. There are many waters like what are called traditional navigable waters, you know, the big waters that we all kind of think of, interstate waters, tributaries, Those have really been sort of the foundation of the definition. But the question comes in for like a wetland, is it connected to any of those other waters? If there's a connection, then is it a jurisdictional water? And that's really where the Supreme Court gave the agencies some direction about how the Clean Water Act should be interpreted. So a lot of the discussion centers around significant nexus, and there's a definition of that in the proposed rule. And the agencies went through a science report process to evaluate more than 1,000 peer-reviewed documents, science from all over the country that attempts to describe whether or not all these various kinds of waters, and there are many, many kinds of waters throughout the country, are connected, and whether or not they should be considered jurisdictional. So that is all part of the effort in this rule to further clarify what is and isn't covered.
So the Corps of Engineers and the EPA got together and proposed this joint rule to get a definition.
Yes, that's correct.
Let's talk a little bit about the rule itself. I read some farm magazines and so on, and people have got some assumptions that they've made out of this, that the ditch in your back field would be regulated and you'd have to have a permit to do anything with it. Right. Can you kind of clarify some of these things that are, again, under a proposed rule?
Okay. Well, there's several things that the proposed rule does. I'll talk a little bit about ditches because that's a very important topic in this part of the country. If you have a ditch that is in the upland, so to speak, or a ditch that doesn't flow year-round, that ditch is not jurisdictional. It would not be covered under the Clean Water Act. So that's an example. Maintenance of a ditch is not covered under the Clean Water Act. One of the things I would say, and we've heard a lot of feedback from farm organizations, environmental groups, various other organizations in our 4 states, because we went out and did some listening sessions. And as people read the rule and the definitions, because the proposed rule attempts to have many definitions to help clarify, some individuals are reading it as it makes it more stringent, not less stringent, and it doesn't exempt some of these things that have traditionally been exemptions. There have been exemptions in the Clean Water Act for certain kinds of waters, especially certain aspects related to agriculture, and those all remain in the proposed rule. But there is some concern that the way it's structured, that maybe that's not really the case.
There's a number of exemptions that are specifically cited in the proposed rule for normal. Maybe that's a good question. What's a normal agricultural activity? Okay,
well, normal farming, silviculture has always been in the definition and as an exemption. So that would remain. I'll give you a few examples here. Things like stock ponds, farm ponds have always been exempt. They would remain exempt. So that's an example of something that's very critical in our part of the country. If you have ag stormwater discharges, you have return flow from irrigation, another especially important part in the states in the western part of our region. Also, tile drains. Tile drains, we certainly have some tile drains in Missouri, a lot of those in Iowa. Tile drains are not regulated. Groundwater is not regulated. And all of those things have previously been exempt and remain exempt.
So some of the farm groups are saying this is just a big overreach. From what you're saying, it doesn't seem like it's quite as much of an overreach as has been proposed, or has been talked about, I guess. You're really maintaining some exemptions that are in the current law.
Correct, we are. And I think a lot of it is how each individual reads the rule. Part of the objective for a proposed rule is to get public comment. And so we really are encouraging people, if the way you read the definitions and the connections between the definitions, if you don't clearly see that those exemptions remain, then comment and offer some suggestions, if you have some, about how we can make this rule clearer when it becomes a final rule.
You've had some listening sessions out in the 4 states. Were those well attended, and did people have some good things to say?
They sure were. We invited about 25 agriculture representatives to a session in each state, and then we invited a second set of 25 people that were environmental organizations, other non-governmental organizations, represented cities, home builders, quite a variety of entities. We had about 150 people come, and a lot of comments and suggestions about how to strengthen various aspects of the proposed rule.
You know, I guess there's a search for common ground or middle ground with a lot of government agencies and so on. I assume that there's some environmental groups that think this doesn't go far enough, or are they pretty well on board?
It really, at least the ones we've heard from so far, it really varies. Some of them, I'm sure, would say it doesn't go far enough. Others are concerned about, is it really clear enough that it can be successfully implemented? And the correct waters that are jurisdictional can be covered appropriately by the Clean Water Act, and those that shouldn't be, that it's very clear, so that we can make sure we're protecting waters appropriately. Because really, the bottom line goal to the Clean Water Act is protection of water and good water quality.
So one of the things I've read is that farmers wouldn't be able to carry out their normal spraying activities or seeding or fertilizer or spreading manure, that sort of thing. Are those things specifically talked about?
No, and I mean, those are certainly normal farming practices that farmers have been doing. They would remain exempt. And so there's some confusion, I think, about how far this rule goes beyond just dredge and fill permits.
So, and that seems to be a focus, because I know that's the Corps' issue, because they're working on the major rivers and so on. But that seems to be what the Corps was concerned about. Is the EPA concerned about some of these big pollution possibilities of, for instance, CAFOs, combined animal feeding operations? Would that be considered covered by this rule?
Well, a CAFO, and the way that regulation is set up, it depends upon how many animals of each species you have. So for example, for cattle, if it's greater than 1,000 head of cattle, then you need a permit. So that's already established in the rules. So this is not really designed to change any of those requirements. Those are already in place. Now, one of the things that is a companion to this rule, this proposed rule, is what was called an interpretive rule that was put out on the same day, April 21st, and it was an effort between EPA, the Corps, and NRCS. And the goal of the interpretive rule is to say for 56 conservation practices that are all designed by NRCS to protect water quality, that any individual, farmer or other individual who might be putting those practices on their land, even if it is in a water of the U.S., that they do not have to have a dredge and fill permit. The objective of that interpretive rule was to say, these practices are all exempt. They protect water quality. We want to encourage, voluntary participation in these conservation programs, and therefore you don't have to go talk to any of these agencies beforehand. You can install those practices. But they have to be installed per the NRCS standards, and they have to be part of an established farming operation, which is a criteria that NRCS has set for their practices.
It sounds like you've got NRCS as a USDA, United States Department of Agriculture agency.
Right.
So it sounds like you've gotten good cooperation from other agencies in trying to put this together. Yes,
we have. And there's really two components here where other agencies are involved. One is, as EPA and the Corps worked with USDA to say, how can we continue to encourage good conservation on the land that protects water quality in the context of this proposed rule? That's the goal of the interpretive rule. But also, in any rulemaking process, as an agency, in this case EPA and the Corps, develop the proposed rule, there is what's called interagency review. So Fish and Wildlife, all the USDA agencies, any other agency who may have some interest in that proposed rule has an opportunity to provide input before that proposed rule goes out for public comment. Likewise, those agencies again have an opportunity to look at the final rule before the final rule would be issued by an agency. And that's true for rulemaking across the board, not just EPA rulemaking.
So if this is a proposed rule, and there's a comment period, which I understand has been extended to allow more people an opportunity to comment. Tell us a little bit about how that whole process works.
All right, be happy to do that. The proposed rule was issued on April 21st, and there originally was a 90-day comment period, which means that would have ended on July 21st. This week, EPA and the Corps announced an additional 90 days public comment opportunity. So now the public comment period will close on October 20th, 2014. And the interpretive rule had, while it was effective immediately so that it was very clear that people could go ahead and put those practices on their land and not need a permit, there was a 45-day comment period so people could say, hey, what about this conservation practice? Or how should this be implemented? Those are some of the questions that we've heard. That 45-day comment period, which would have ended June 5th, just recently, has been extended to July 7th. So the public can provide comments, and one way they can do that is, everybody does everything online right now. You can go to epa.gov/US Waters, and that website will take you directly to how you can do comments online. You can send your comments handwritten in an envelope. There are a variety of ways for the public to comment, and we really are encouraging everyone to comment.
So people still have an opportunity to ask for clarification, ask for better definitions, yes. Complain about the jurisdiction of the rule, and so on. So that opportunity is there. And then what would the next steps be? There'll be the comment period. Let's say it ends in October. Does that mean November 1st we're going to have a new permanent rule?
Oh no, there will be a lot of comments on this rule, and what happens is the two agencies will take those comments, they'll evaluate them, and then go through the interagency process, the process of writing and developing a final rulemaking that would come out sometime later.
So what have you heard from some of the people when you had the meetings? What are some of the, I guess I'm trying to help people who might want to comment about how they might structure those comments and so on. What have you heard from the people that you've already heard from in the public meetings?
Okay. Some of it is that there are a lot of definitions in this rule, proposed rule, and there's a lot of concern that it's not really clear how they all fit together, and whether or not if it says one thing is or is not included, but further down that same kind of water, for example, is referenced again. It's not really clear how all those definitions fit together. We've heard that from a number of people. We've also heard on the conservation practice side that many farmers, as we all know, construct practices on their land without utilizing USDA funds. And so therefore they may not follow that practice just to the very letter. They are still getting the water quality benefit, but maybe they probably didn't have a written plan, or as one person said in Kansas, I've got a 32-row planter, and I construct my terraces in a way that I can get my planter over those terraces, but I'm still getting water quality benefit at the bottom of my field. The same water quality benefit as if I would construct that terrace in the way that USDA tells me. So therefore, would I be eligible for this exemption? So those are some of the kinds of questions we're getting.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We've had exactly that thing happen on our farm this spring, where their design of a waterway didn't suit me, and so we're doing that on our own.
Right.
But I should still get some benefit from that, if you will. Not that I don't think we were in a wetland or anything that would have caused a problem. I just want to make that clear.
Okay, you're right. So those are the kinds of things that we're hearing from people. They're saying, there was an attempt by the agencies to provide clarity, but in doing that, maybe we didn't really provide the clarity that folks are seeking to really understand whether waters are or are not covered.
So this comment period, and you can do it online and so on, give us what will happen after that. Will it be, you expect that maybe in the past history another year before permit things are issued?
Well, I really wouldn't be probably the right person to answer that question. That rulemaking process is developed in headquarters. We in the regions have certainly an opportunity to provide input and help with that. But a lot of it depends on how many comments, and as they evaluate those, how many changes are we going to make to the rule, whether or not there needs to be another comment period. And also the science report that I mentioned earlier is going to factor into that final rule, and that is in the process of being completed now. And the Science Advisory Board, which is an independent organization that gives us input on science issues like this, is making recommendations to the agencies that we will also incorporate in the final rule. So it's going to be a while.
Well, I guess that's one of the things I wanted to emphasize. Again, in reading some of the farm press and the sky is falling, I don't want people to think that this is going to be dropped on us and that by next winter they're going to have to be worried too much about this. This is something that's going to take a while. There'll be plenty of opportunity for press and so on to get the final rule out so we know exactly where we stand.
Right. And one of the things we always do in our office when there's a final rule, and even with this proposed rule, we do a big email blast and we have things on our website too, to make sure that all the folks in our 4-state area are aware of what is happening. They may hear it through their farm organization or other entities, but we also try to make sure and get that information out. But it certainly will take a while to finalize this rule, because as you indicated, there's a lot of questions and controversy.
I hope we've made this clear that there's plenty of opportunity for people to comment and that this is not a final thing that's going to be dropped on us. We've got just a couple of minutes here. Let's talk about some other issues. You also work with pesticides. I mean, maybe this rule right now is taking up a lot of your time, but you work with some other things. Where are we at with water quality? I mean, you mentioned a couple of big problems that we have in the Midwest. What other issues do you have to work with on a regular basis?
Well, we have, with the states, of course, permitting for wastewater treatment facilities. I also have responsibility for the drinking water program, so ensuring that we have safe drinking water through public water systems. Pesticides is always very important in this part of the country. One of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is many pesticide imports come in, especially to Kansas City, and then our products are distributed further throughout this part of the country. Technical grade products to make those products that you buy at your local co-op. So there's a lot of other issues like that that we deal with in our office, just from a water and pesticide side.
A few years ago, I know atrazine was considered a problem, and there were some reservoirs in Missouri that were drinking water reservoirs where they were finding traces of atrazine. Have those things sort of been cleaned up? We use atrazine less than we used to.
Right. Through a variety of means. One is less use, changing some practices. But yes, many of the reservoirs, not only in Missouri, but in Kansas and some in Nebraska, we're seeing improvements in water quality. We're not seeing near the atrazine issues that we had. Still a few places in our region where we've got some water quality sampling that's still showing some atrazine problems, but those are very isolated and are being worked on in those very small geographic areas.
You mentioned earlier one of the problems was algae blooms because of nutrients, and the over-application of nitrogen is something that I constantly read about, and we were very carefully, I want to emphasize that, putting nitrogen on corn this morning. But that's a big issue for us, and we've really worked to, partly because of the expense of it, we've really worked to try to be sure that that nitrogen is captured. And is that still a problem throughout the Midwest and corn country?
Well, it is, but it's not certainly all related by any means to fertilizer application. There are many contributors, as I call them, to the nutrient pollution problem. Everybody's sort of got a stake in that, not just agriculture, but all of us citizens, municipalities. Air deposition is a problem, so there's a variety of sources that lead to excess nutrients in waters. I
know at one time we were concerned about a dead zone out in the Gulf. Is that still an issue? Has that been improved at all?
It's still there. The state of Missouri, along with all of the states that are kind of considered the STEM states, so to speak, up and down both sides of the river, are working on nutrient reduction strategies that will address decreasing nutrient pollution to waters from non-point sources and from point sources like wastewater treatment plants. So there's still significant effort going on to continue to improve both local water quality in the state of Missouri, and therefore that helps improve the water quality in the Gulf.
It's interesting, Missouri is such a, well, the 4 states you represent are a big drainage area for the entire country, and it's the primary production states as well, so I know that's a big issue.
It is.
Any other issues that we are looking at that we need to be concerned about?
I think those are probably the big ones right now.
And so groundwater contamination, is that, and wells and that sort of thing, is that a problem?
Well, groundwater, one of the things I want to make sure, I think I said it earlier, but I want to say it again, is groundwater is not addressed by this Waters of the U.S. proposed rule. Make that very clear. Yes, surface water. We do see a variety of groundwater contaminants. Some are caused by nutrients, certainly. Many are caused by industries, a variety of other, maybe even legacy pollution sources. So there's a lot of work going on in cleanup programs to address groundwater contamination. We certainly look at it from a drinking water perspective too.
Are we seeing a depletion of the aquifer and so on? I know that's probably is true in some of your areas out in Kansas and
Right.
Nebraska.
Right, it is. Groundwater quality is becoming more and more of an issue. It certainly has been in western Kansas, western Nebraska, but Missouri and Iowa are seeing more quality issues now, and groundwater quality is not regulated under the Clean Water Act.
I really appreciate your time, and I also appreciate the work you put in to help our water stay safe and clean, and I want people to realize the progress we've made over the last 40 years in improving things.
And that's thanks to everybody.
Yeah, it's a big effort.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have tonight. We'd like to say thanks again to Karen Flournoy for being with us, and we'd also like to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in to Show Me Ag. We hope you'll tune in next time for another look at a topic touching rural Missouri. For everyone here at KMOS and myself, good night. We're also very interested in what you have to say. So if you have feedback you'd like to share with us, you can email us at showmeag@kmos.org or find us on Facebook.